if you've been working in information security for a minute, you know, even really IT, frankly, you know that it is very, very difficult to keep the vulnerabilities at bay, especially as it continues to ramp up year over year. You can't patch all the things. And that is what we're talking about today. We have brought in Dave Klein, who's got a wealth of experience and background. He's a director, he's a cyber evangelist, he loves the field, and he knows a thing or two about vulnerabilities. We're going to bring him in. We're going to talk about why threat and vulnerability management is like out of control, what can be done about it, and really what are the best ways to go about like taking action on handling this just kind of pervasive issue of dealing with an increase in threats and the vulnerabilities. So let's get into it today. Thanks a lot. What's up, Dave? How you doing, man?
Welcome. Great to be here, Jerry.
Yeah, thank you so much. So, Dave, before we get into it, I know you personally, and we've talked quite a bit, but for chat, for the Simply Cyber community, can you just tell us a little bit about your background with regards to threat and vulnerability management?
Sure, absolutely. I've been in the field for over 21 years. A lot of work as a cybersecurity vendor with customers after 9/11 with the city of New York. And then 10 years doing U.S. federal work with various agencies and things like that. Even worked on an executive thing with President Obama. And throughout that entire time, a lot of incident response work and serious stuff, especially with the federal government stuff, a lot of nation state actors and espionage and counter espionage, and just found so often the crux of the different problems we run into were those vulnerabilities and how quickly actors were able to take advantage of those vulnerabilities to cause problems and wreak havoc, and how you'd have to go in there, clean things up. And then absolutely the number one thing was, what else could they hit? And what is vulnerable and what we need to shore up security for.
Yeah. And you and I know, because we both have gray in our beard, which means we've been around the block once or twice.
I have more than you. I have more than you.
So you've been around the block one more time than me, for sure. But can you paint the picture for us on what things look like 10 years ago, 5 years ago with vulnerabilities? I know you've done some research on this specifically, yes, and it's really quite fascinating. So where were we and where are we now?
I mean, you take me after 9/11, I'd have a handful of known nasties, vulnerabilities that would cause issues in environments and stuff like that, to just 2010, you're talking about 5,000 new vulnerabilities annually. So you've gone from a situation where it's something you kind of keep on a dry erase board or on a spreadsheet to something you need to track on a daily basis. And then if you go from 2010 to 2019, it jumped from 5,000 to 20,000 in 2019. In 2021, both years, we were looking over 30,000 annually. Mm-hmm. So now you're in a situation where these things are coming fast, very fast. And on top of that, when you look at what they call a CVSS version 3 score, right? That's the severity score. You have in the wild today over 19,000 above a 9+ rating, which is RCE capable, right? Remote code execution capable.
Yeah, and it's important to note that the top of that scale is a 10. So
yes,
yeah, I mean, you're almost right there at the top.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And that's what we're dealing with. So we're dealing with a situation where these vulnerabilities come daily. And many of them are, again, at that 9+ rating. And thus there needs to be really a different way of how we do things. When we think about things in the past, you would get a situation where you would get a vulnerability that couldn't wait to a patch window, right? And you would get people together in the conference room of the director. You take their conference table and throw all the stuff on the floor, clean off the table, clean off the dry erase board, and create a tiger team. But in today's world, with the fact that they come daily, and we're tracking so many in the wild that are above a 9+ rating, and there's 30,000 new ones a year, it really is a situation where handling this in a cycle, in a regular fashion, is going to be necessary.
Yeah. So I have my thoughts, but Dave, share with us why has there been essentially like a logarithmic increase in amount of vulnerabilities? Like you'd think almost it would be linear, but it's definitely going up exponentially, year over year or cycle over cycle. Why is that from your perspective?
There's a number of things going on, and actually some of it is healthy, right? So for example, bug bounties. And when I started in the industry, bug bounties were a no-go. You never were to give out a bug bounty. But today, people understand that as really helping to encourage people doing the right things. So I think bug bounties are part of the reason why we see an increase in vulnerabilities. I think we're finding that people have a better sense of finding these things in general, in the way that they have their tooling set up to look for these things and regression testing and stuff like that. And people are more aware of what the reporting cycles are. In the past, they might find a bug and say, oh, I know what that is. But now they know, okay, I know how to report it. So I think people are more educated on how to report it. I think we have bug bounties. And then you have the other side of the coin. You have the attackers. And the way the attackers have taken their own criminal supply chains and affinity groups and hunters and specialization into people who look out for vulnerabilities. It used to be, a 0 day was something that was only a diet for the nation state. Today, criminals, everyone will put those out there because they can get more money by giving it to criminals than to the nation state. So I think that there's a situation where there's a greater number of attackers out there who also know how to take advantage of these vulnerabilities. And also I could say is the other big thing is there's been a rise in technology in general across the world. And we're talking about the ability to find vulnerabilities within Flash, within applications, within operating systems, within your browser, within your switches, your routers, your security devices, right? I mean, how many vulnerabilities this year were announced about VPNs in 2021, right? Discord, right?
Yeah.
And employee installed apps, right? The idea we're working from home, so people have apps that they want to listen to or look at while they work. It's a case of the proliferation. Also, is because in the past I think it was viewed as an operating system thing, and now people see it in everything that we do.
Yeah, I agree with you 100% that it is kind of this perfect storm of technology explosion, like the adoption of technology, explosive growth. Plus, unfortunately, in a capitalist society, first to market usually gets the lion's share of the of the adoption, right? Of the user adoption. So there used to be a phrase, you probably remember this again because we have gray in our beards, but this literally was a phrase Microsoft used to have. We ship on Monday and we patch on Wednesday. And the idea, and of course now it's Patch Tuesday, but originally Microsoft had the mantra that they would go to market and they would just fix it after the fact because they were losing revenue if they would fix everything before they sent it out because there'd always be another problem that came up, right?
Well, there was a phrase: "There's no better QA than having customers hit the software." Right. So absolutely, that was almost like it was a best practice. Let's be honest, it was a best practice.
So but it's certainly, so you've got all this technology out there, of course, and then to your point, I know this episode is more about what to do with when you can't patch all the things, but it is worth noting again that the rise of bug bounties is such a win for everybody because organizations are getting a fleet of workforce looking for vulnerabilities, and they're only truly paying for when they are actually discovered. So, there's value from that. And then to allow security researchers to work kind of like an Uber style, where it's a gig economy, is a win for them, and you get experience and all that. So it's definitely really, really cool. One thing that you did touch on that I'd like your thoughts on, Dave, is, and I see this in my environment all the time, and I'm sure you see it in your clients' environments. Like when I talk to IT is like, we're responsible for the operating system. And I know you mentioned a little bit about this, but even not endpoint installed apps, but like part of the standard load, whether it's like Microsoft Word or, Java or whatever. A lot of times IT is like, we maintain the operating system. All that other stuff is on you, or, it just doesn't get patched. Like what kind of frequency are you seeing where that vulnerability attack surface, for lack of a better term, persists long term.
I'd argue that the challenge here is, in the past, they took a very myopic approach to what they're responsible for. But the bottom line is, today, everyone comes to work with a smartphone integrated into the workplace. People have tablets. People are using their own devices at home. We're all been working from home. And I'd argue that the real challenge here is when we think about phantom IT, right? We think about the fact that in the past, everything was provisioned, and I argue it was never totally correct, but the idea was you had a better idea what was going on. But today, we're not just talking about a department puts a AWS VPC up, it doesn't tell headquarters, or a new application gets rolled out by DevOps and doesn't tell the security team to watch it. But we're talking about the fact that the average consumer of IT wants certain things, and they're going to load Discord to talk to their friends about work, right? Yeah. They're going to load Slack. They're going to load some third-party apps that are not part of the gold standard image that's being pushed out. And so I'd argue that it's really changed how we have to view this, right? And how what we think is what we're responsible for. And in some ways, as the IT department, you're the parent, you're the champion for the user, but you're also there to help them do the right things and help keep them safe.
Yeah, well, and now we're talking about things that can be patched or should be patched, and I would argue that I feel like applications should come default to auto update, right? Like you can configure your Google Chrome browser or whatever to auto update, but it's not always by default. Just like changing the default credentials on a system isn't always required by default. And I think that could go a long way into kind of basically automating this responsibility that everybody seems to have a diffusion of responsibility about. But another element that I think it's important that we discuss, Dave, is the things that you can't patch, right? Like I'm not saying, like no confirmation or confirm or deny, but like I could have Windows XP in my environment, right? and people always, push back on Twitter, like, oh, that's gross. How could you possibly do that? But in business, if the machine cost $1 million and it still makes widgets the same way it made widgets when they bought it, you find me one CFO who's going to stroke a check to replace the machine that's not broken. It's not happening.
Correct. But what comes to this conversation is the fact that, and whether we're talking about a legacy device, and by the way, hospitals, those medical devices, those lovely cabinets you see people roll along that are powder coated white, with a machine on top. If you open up the cabinet, you'll find they'll have a Dell Optiplex from 2010 that are still running Windows XP, and it has never been patched. The same is there's a lot of ATMs out there that are XP, by the way. I don't know if you do that, Windows 7. But the key is, in cases where they're saying, hey, listen, I put out a capital expenditure of $1 million for these things, and they're still making us money, I'm going to keep them. The key differentiator here is being able to understand the risk, right? Is be able to understand the risk that poses to you. And so when we talk about, and I'm from Cymulate, we deal with attack-based vulnerability management and posture management. The concept is that you want the ability to say, okay, so you have that XP machine that's out there that is making widgets or what have you, but there's nothing I can do to make it secure enough, to lower the risk score enough. So the key thing is for people like that is you need to have the ability to test in the environment and say, okay, let's say with Windows 7, I'm able to do, and let me explain this for a second. So when I say first party and third party security controls, this is what I mean. First party, what I'm talking about is the operating system. If it's in the cloud controls, container, parameters. I'm talking about your various ACLs and switching routers and security devices that you have in your environment. If you can sit there and find extenuating security controls that are first party, or third party. Third party is, again, the switches, the routers, the firewalls, and things like that. So you have the operating system and the containers and the VPCs, and then you have the actual security devices. If I could find ways to isolate that vulnerability so it can't be utilized, then I can go back to management saying risk is low. We can keep that Windows 7 machine, but XP, I can't do anything with XP. Right? I've tried everything. I can't fix it enough to keep it safe. So the key is, and that's also what we're talking about here with the vulnerabilities coming so fast, is the fact that often time from, if there isn't a 0 day when a vulnerability is announced, the time to weaponization, usually you see a vulnerability announced, within a few hours, there's a GitHub location where there's proof of concept exploit. And if people out there don't know what I'm talking about, is often what you'll see is a vulnerability announced, and then you'll have people say, hey, based on this Windows vulnerability, I've created a test exploit in the environment. And in fact, and that's kind of critical, right? And so you see how it works, but literally within 48 hours, there's someone taking advantage of it criminally, right? So the key is whether we're talking about legacy devices in your environment, or whether we're talking about the fact of how are we going to take care and secure our environment before we get to that patching window, the understanding that first party and third party security controls are necessary and how they can protect you in the interim.
Yeah. And we, like, just recently, as a perfect example of what you're talking about, Log4j. Log4j came out, and oddly, it's not exactly always happened this way, but oddly, there was already an exploit on GitHub by a Chinese researcher,
Yes,
who had done some work for
I read
DEF
that
CON.
one.
Yeah.
Yes.
And GitHub actually ended up pulling that repository offline because it was basically a weaponized Log4j attack vehicle. So, it was all hands on deck for Log4j, right? Like the world was on fire for a hot minute trying to figure out, are we vulnerable to Log4j? So it absolutely does happen in that time to, this is really, it's threat and vulnerability management, which is its own kind of capability within a mature information security office. But if you're not big enough, I think it's important people understand this. If you're not big enough, I would argue that falls under more of a GRC capability, because like you just said, Dave, like, okay, we can't fix this. We can't patch this. We need to keep this. The business wants it. What is the actual risk? Because you mentioned CVSS score earlier, right? And let's say this nasty thing is a 9.3, right? Or it's a 10. Let's just make it a straight 10. Like, you absolutely do not want this, but they're not going to get rid of it. Okay, well, is it actually at risk? Is it reachable from the internet? Because we talk about remote code execution. Well, if it's not reachable, well, then maybe we can recalculate the CVSS score a bit, right? Maybe we can put it on network, and you start thinking of more architecture related solutions to fix it. But at the end of the day, it's understanding what is the risk of that vulnerability. And that's why I think it's a GRC function.
No, absolutely. And when we think about the recipe for success, we can get into that's really what's necessary for the executives, right? It is understanding what is my risk, what is the business concern, right? So for example, that system makes widgets, and that's what you do for a living. If the widgets are down, you lose so many millions per hour. Very quickly, you could find out how valuable it is to keep that older operating system, right? If it would be a situation to replace it is going to talk some additional money and funds and investment, but it's still much less than the loss, then it makes sense, right? And then they'll understand it. But that's a key, is for us as cyber researchers and first responders, what's important for us is to learn that business language. I would say, I'd argue, if someone said, what is different today for me than when I started, is I've had to become well-versed in business speak, in legal speak in some situations, in GRC speak and risk. And I think that's important for your listeners, as you guys learn and guys and gals learn as you go forward. That's going to be important for you to understand, is that you will gain some additional skill sets and things that are very untechnical.
Yes. Yeah. And it's important to note too, if you're a pen tester or an offensive security professional, and you would learn this pretty quickly. Like, if your findings, your report shouldn't say, I found all these problems and your remediation is to patch all the things. right?
Right.
I mean, that's why this episode's called "You Can't Patch All the Things," because that is the reality of it. It's much more akin to creative solutions and really understanding what is the actual risk to the organization, and then conveying that as an advisor,
Yep.
Role. And Kariba asked the question about segmentation and ACLs and stuff like that, and I really feel that speaks to kind of these compensating controls that might be specific to your environment. Because with the CVSS scores, they're doing that as a blanket, right? That's for
Right.
everybody, and everybody's organization is different.
And yes, that question is totally valid. And by the way, I'm a huge fan of software-based segmentation, which is not just doing segmentation on the edge, but throughout your environment, right? And SASE in some way is another way of looking at segmentation as well, the zero trust type segmentation. 200%. The idea is by using those compensating controls, you can keep things in play until a patch cycle, or if the business needs it permanently, right? And that's what I think is different. It's not just a knee-jerk reaction to patch. It should be, what compensating controls do I have first and third to incorporate, number one, and then number two, if I can't, then I need to patch. But I think if you think about a recipe for success, you start by finding ways to discover and visualize the vulnerabilities in your environments, right, in your landscape. And we're talking about operating systems, cloud controls, all that phantom IT I discussed, right, and phantom apps, which are now popular, right? The idea that people are running different things. And it starts with that. And the key is, it's not only what you think is out there, it's what's out there, right? So having different ways to do that is really critical. And then the second thing is what we talked about is first and third party security controls, becoming adept and understanding how they can be incorporated between patch cycles or in lieu of patching, which is really kind of critical. And then really, I think on a daily basis, someone needs to be responsible in an environment to look at the new vulnerabilities that came out that day and the ones that you still have in the environment, and seeing what the workarounds are, and coming up with a way of finding ways to compensate so that they're not taken advantage of by attackers before you get a chance to compensate them or patch them, and that kind of thing, which is really important.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so having someone look at the vulnerabilities of the day, I mean, that sounds like a good idea, and they do come out very quickly. We do the threat briefings every morning, where that's just kind of situational awareness. You're not going to look through all the CVEs every day, like the published CVEs by MITRE every day. You could, but that is a lot of work to see if it actually is in scope. One of the things, and if you're in chat and you work in IT and you live this, give a shout out, because this is another reality that if you're trying to break into the industry, you're going to find out the first month is just the frequency of actually patching, right? So if we talk about you can't patch all the things, Dave, but let's say you could patch all the things. Microsoft releases Patch Tuesday, the first Tuesday of the month every month, and in my reality, I mean, IT is just finishing validating the patches and applying them as best they can, and taking a break, like grabbing a drink of water before the next Patch Tuesday hits them right in the face. And a lot of times they don't have enough time to even do it fully, like especially a short month like February, right? I mean, that's like 3 more days that you don't have. So I feel like that's another challenge that information security programs coupled with IT really face, is even if you wanted to do everything, and even if there was patches for everything, they come so quickly and in such large numbers that that's another different challenge to have to wrestle with.
So let's talk about some of the things that you could do to help with that workload. So for one, and I'd argue this is true this year so much, is that cybersecurity is everyone's responsibility. And we could say that nicely, and people will go, well, that doesn't mean anything, because does it really mean it? Well, it does mean it. And what I mean is that you need to include the SOC team, the security controls teams, Active Directory, the operating system teams, the cloud controls team, because they have to be included, right? In some ways, the only way that this gets done in finding compensating controls and things like that is including the other teams and have them involved in it, right? And I think that's kind of critical. Technical perspective. We already talked about on the executive side. The executive side is being able to tell them, what is the business continuity? What is the reduction in risk if you do something? What is the expense if you do it or not do it? It's kind of critical getting the executives on board, right? So I think what's important is, again, to include those teams as well.
Yeah. So okay. So I agree. It is important to include those people. But what kind of techniques can people use? Because it's almost becomes a political game, for lack of a better term. Not quite Game of Thrones, but you have to. Um, what's it called? There's like a famous book about it, like influence and make friends and influence or something like that.
Was it Dale Carnegie? Yeah, how to influence friends make friends and influence people.
Yeah. I mean, because basically that's what you have to do. I mean, you have to take something that is important, and you know it's important because you're educated to understand the risk and what could possibly happen and stuff, and then talk to people who are focused on doing their job, which is not your job, and convince them to take cycles from whatever they're working on to help you achieve your goals. And that is a learned skill all unto itself, I would argue.
Correct.
But I guess what would you suggest as far as dealing specifically with, like, hey, we've got 9,000 open vulnerabilities, like literally, and let's say 4,000 are low, but still there's 500 that are critical or high. Like this needs to be taken care of. How do you have those conversations with these teams that you just mentioned are important?
Well, the key thing is you're delegating out to various teams to what vulnerabilities are in their wheelhouse, right? And the key thing is, to be successful today, security has to be incorporated in everything. To help us with that, if you look at 2020 and 2021, the level of threat in those 2 years was huge. And yet at the same time, for the first time, I would argue, is the business side of the house really understood that this was a risk to the business. It was an existential problem. So I'd argue that this is something that the other teams are realizing is not just cybersecurity at the kids' table at the family event. That it's important that they participate and are involved. But it's important that you involve all these different teams in the mix to be able to do this. That's essential.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And Adrian brings up another interesting point that I didn't really touch on, but it's valid. Is you can send patches that break functionality, right?
Absolutely.
So it's not always about having the time or having the patch available. Like Windows XP doesn't have any patches. So, but like it could be a legit patch. We just saw it last week with VMware patching and AD servers getting stuck in boot loops.
Correct. Right. So yeah, if you're not able to test first, and that's part of the patching cycle, if you're not able to test first, you might break something, which goes back to the fact that the window between a vulnerability and an attack is usually less than 48 hours. So we're at a point where really those mitigating controls are essential, should be the first step before patching, right? And the idea of, if you want time to see if it breaks things, if you want time for let's stop all our business activities and patch this, you're going to need to be able to take care of those first and third party controls.
Yeah. And if you have enough political capital, you can take BSEC's approach here, Dave, which is basically just push the patches. And if someone calls you and says you broke my stuff, you tell them it was a security update. Had to do it.
Kind of sounds like Microsoft there. Just the reverse of it, right? Just the reverse of it. I once had a mentor, and when we're talking about when my hair was totally blonde and I had lots of hair, so we're talking a long time ago, and we had a patch panel that the engineers would use for their labs. And he kept nicely asking them to say, when we have a change control window, we need to rewire this. It's really messy. And eventually what he started to do is, when no one responded, he would take out six connections at a time and wait for someone to complain. But anyway, that's not the answer. But yes, anyway.
No, but you know what? It is a funny story. But I will say that is an actual practice that is still practiced today, right? So you run a vulnerability scanner, right? You find all this nasty business, and you say, who owns this? Like, I'll give you a perfect example. This is a real life example recently. Who owns this webcam that's on our network? This webcam has a really nasty RCE. And first of all, why is it there? Second of all, who owns it? You're running it down. IT doesn't know. The business doesn't know. People at the plant don't know. Nobody knows, but it's there. So the answer is you just remove it. you know,
Right. Right.
and see if someone complains. And, you know, if they complain, like basically it's easier for someone to come find you because they're complaining than it is for you to try to find a person who's really not interested or forgot about it. It was a pet project, whatever. But it is the reality that you have to deal with. Um, so, you know, one of the things I know, you obviously, you know, work for Cymulate. I use Cymulate's product, or I've been using it for a couple of weeks and find it interesting. I'm kind of curious, like, I know we're talking about threat and vulnerability management, but can you use kind of the outputs of like a tool like Cymulate to actually influence or make a better case? And I think I know the answer to this because I've actually used the output of it to talk to my CIO.
Absolutely. I mean, absolutely. So what we do is extended security posture management. That's what Cymulate does.
Mm-hmm.
And part of what we do is offensive testing in your environment of all the latest exploits of the day, updated 365, 24/7. And the cool part is it teaches you to think about those extenuating controls, the first party and third party controls. And then most importantly is vulnerabilities are throughout. So if there's an exploit we test, you know what vulnerabilities are associated with it. And when we do asset checks and asset scans, we get the vulnerabilities associated with it. And then the best part is we have a section called attack-based vulnerability management, which then says, based on your environment and the tests, these are the top 5 go-to right now that you need to take care of. So you talked about being overwhelmed and saying, I have, you know, you have so many vulnerabilities out there, so many above a 9. But if you're able to go back and say, hey, listen, I ran some tests, we got to handle this first.
Mm-hmm.
Right? These are the ones that are the most important. That's the beauty of what we do, is we make it easy to find the real gear, the phantom gear, the phantom apps, the real apps, and find what you're vulnerable to, and what is most important to go after first.
Yeah, and that that's why I actually put prioritizing your vulnerabilities in order on the promo card, because it really is important to understand which bite of the sandwich to take first,
Yes.
right? And guys, when I tell you, if you haven't done this in practice before, when I tell you that like a normal healthy environment will have thousands of open vulnerabilities, I'm not joking. Like that's pretty good if you're down in the thousands. You know, large organizations like you know, a multi-billion-dollar company could have hundreds of thousands, if not million. So you almost, I've felt this before. You feel defeated or overwhelmed, like you've got this mountain of sandwich, and taking one bite makes very little difference. And you exhausted so much energy. Maybe you spent some political capital in order to get something fixed, and it just, you almost feel overwhelmed and defeated. So by having something that can help you prioritize, right? And you can do it different ways. Cymulate's one way. There's other ways, right? I mean, if it's like front page news, log4j, like you can get some type of, you know, short list, like these are the 5 things that I'm going to focus on. And then it becomes way more manageable. As a practitioner perspective, you don't feel overwhelmed or defeated or apathetic. And that's the worst, when you just don't care anymore. That's like, if you're there, you got problems.
Right. Yeah. Real problems. So, and by the way, burnout is a real thing in cybersecurity. People get burnt out.
Yeah, exactly.
And beyond the prioritization, the second thing about Cymulate is the ability, we talk about the executive, giving them that risk statement, saying, okay, I know this makes our widgets, and that's important, but this is the risk of not doing anything. And here's how the risk will be less if we do something, right? Whether again it's first and third party controls or having to patch. So that's the other benefit, right? Is you have the prioritization and the ability to easily explain risk and visualize that risk to not only the first responders, but the IT staff, but also the business people.
Yeah, and I know, like, so this is new-ish to me. I heard about it a couple days ago, but I personally want more information from you, Dave.
Yes.
But in order to get better educated and understand how to, you know, approach these challenges, have these conversations, understand risk, etc., you guys have a couple of things, this academy and this community. We could talk about them separately, but can you kind of talk about them and like what exactly it is? Because because I'm interested, and I'm hoping, you know, chat's also interested.
So the beautiful thing is at Cymulate, we're giving back to the community in an vendor agnostic fashion, and getting that feedback from everyone. So the first thing is called community.cymulate.com. That's your community of users who are looking at attacks and exploits and vulnerabilities and coming up with different things. So that's us talking to the community and them talking to us. And then the second thing, which I think is great because you have a lot of people starting out in the business, is we have the E Academy or E Academy. It's spelled E Academy.
Yeah, make sure you get that right, because
Yes.
I also thought it was E Academy. So yeah.
Cymulate.com/E Academy. And what's beautiful here is you can get a certification, 2 courses. And these courses, again, are agnostic, and they're about continuous security validation and becoming a security validation pro. If you're a CISSP, you'll love to know that you get ISC squared credits for this. And there's 2 great courses. The first one is talking about offensive cybersecurity, types of security assessments, understanding MITRE ATT&CK overview, how to look at new IOCs and TTPs and things like that. The second course is hands-on hacking. It's a great lab series of labs, including, you know, offensive cybersecurity assessment types, privilege escalations, lateral movements using NTLM and other things, and then taking a deep dive into a supply chain attack and into a ransomware attack, all of which you do in the lab, which is really awesome. So again, free coursework. It's free. You can use it. You can sign in and create a person for that. Get a badge when you get the two courses done and get credits towards your ISC squared.
So, and how much is this Academy?
It's free.
It's free. Okay, so people can just go to this link and do it. All right, so guys, there you go. More free training. I'll have to add this to the Simply Cyber page of free resources. Now, the community you spoke about quickly, but I don't understand. Is it like a Discord server? Is it a forum? Is it like how is it working? What is the community?
So currently, it is a web forum. Right. And it relates to doing offensive cybersecurity, using Cymulate, understanding new vulnerabilities are out, what to test, how to test, you know, looking at the results and things like that. So it's kind of our community of users.
Oh, all right. Okay. So that's cool. Yeah. And that's free also, I assume, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So good. I love free stuff, Dave. I know chat loves free stuff. So let's do this really quickly. We had a late contribution from Russell Brinson, friend of Simply Cyber. He's donated a giveaway. So let's tee up a giveaway, Dave. And then actually, while that's, you know, people are entering and stuff like that, I got a couple questions from chat to throw at you. Okay.
Sure.
Okay, cool. So let us you guys know the routine here. It is all about putting in hashtag the squad, but don't do it yet, because I actually have to start. I have to start the actual you know, the giveaway, guys. Hashtag the squad. Okay, there you go. Put it in chat. Hashtag the squad. Question for you, Dave, and I love this question. I love BSEC. So we're talking about bite the sandwich because you're overwhelmed by, you know, all the vulnerabilities. Where do you go first? Like, what's your prioritization as far from a business execution perspective?
The key here is having an ability to prioritize and understand risk. So the idea is where you have the ability to scan the environment and find these things is understand what assets are most important, what applications are most important, right? So the idea is you know, you lose RCE on a web portal to a security device that doesn't do anything anyway, right? That's off to the side, and that's one thing. But if it's a situation that this is to our SAP implementation, which is how our businesses run, how we pay our bills, invoices, and stuff like that, you need to have an idea in your environment what's most important, and that's kind of critical, right? And so the ability to come out there and see that, and then again be able to use tools like Cymulate or others to say, and this in your environment seems to be most impactful. Mm-hmm. You have the concept of what are the assets that are most important for me, and then the ability to say this is most risky, is the most damaging. We need to do this first. So the idea, I think that's really kind of critical.
Yeah, I would agree. And so this is a question that gets asked all the time, and I'm really interested in your thoughts. Okay, so we're the technician, right?
Yep.
We've got our problems, we got our vulnerabilities. We're reporting and stuff.
Yeah.
What to you are the key, risk indicators? What metrics, like, if, because you can't present to a CFO or the board, you can't present to them this huge donut chart, like, graphical eye candy thing, right? Like, you really only get a couple minutes and you get a couple key points to make, and they have to have impact to help your agenda.
Yeah.
So what are your, what metrics do you find have value, or how have you used which vulnerability metrics in the past to kind of help your agenda?
So number one is understanding what's important to them for the business. So if it's a situation where the application, the device, the servers, the what have you are involved in production or something that relates to money, they want to know that this is the so-and-so application, which is how we generate revenue and do this, and this. This is critical, right? And by not fixing it, we have this extended risk for not fixing it, right? And so for them, they're not interested in that it's a CVSS version 3 9+ score. They don't care that it's RCE, right? They don't care that you come without elevated rights. They don't need to know all that information. They just need to know that this is a serious problem. Take care of it now. And here's it's a critical part of our business deployment, and it has this kind of risk. That's what they want to know.
Yeah, and so I agree 100%. Tying it to the money is good, and thinking from the business perspective, that's probably the biggest challenge that technical people have to get over as they go through their career and beginning to have to talk to the business side of the house. Right. I would also argue, I have found, it's not really an argument, it's my thought on this. I have found that if there is a hot news story like Log4j, you can basically capitalize on it because the CFO reads the paper, or Wall Street Journal or CNBC may have mentioned it. And you're like, oh, like, I'm also talking about that. We really should focus on that, right? I have found, of course, that's a bit of a crapshoot because you're hoping that they heard it independent of you, and now you're like, they're in the know. So that doesn't always work, but it has had its benefits in the past. Also,
it does. And by the way, that does occur. I mean, that occurs a lot more than it used to. The other thing that I noticed that is very helpful is if you don't have the story of the day, if you know that a peer was affected by something, you say, hey, remember how our main competitor was taken down for a week? Yeah. That's the same kind of vulnerability I'm talking about here, right? And the key is you do get a hall pass for, it may not be the same ransomware gang. It may not be the exact CVE, where they use this one, and this is another one. The point is you can make comparisons. You can say, listen, you remember how our competitor was taken down 3 weeks ago? This is this kind of level thing, right? Again, fear tactics are never your number one thing. Start with the business, start with the expense, start with the risk. But there is a place. There's a place for showmanship.
Yeah, absolutely. And fear, uncertainty, and doubt is a tool to have in the toolbox. But if you go to it too many times, you start dealing with a tone deaf audience.
Correct. And that's important too. Is you don't want to be Chicken Little, where you're constantly saying the sky's falling and it doesn't fall, right?
Yep.
And that's important, because when we're successful, the sky doesn't fall, right?
Yeah. Well, that's always been the hard part in our industry. Is like, the better you do at your job, the less it looks like you're doing.
Yes.
Because nothing's happening. I see chat. Gregory Jones asked, "What's an RCE?" Because you kept saying it. Chat did break the acronym down to remote code execution. But if you want to explain that, because like just saying the words remote code execution may not actually mean anything to Gregory.
So remote code execution is a term you often hear, RCE, or capable, right? And what it means is an attacker remotely can use this exploit based on a vulnerability, make an exploit based on a vulnerability to actually root the box. So come in, become the administrator, the root, and own the box. So when they say this vulnerability has RCE capabilities, it means remotely I can sit there and attack one of your things and take over and command as root or administrator.
Yeah, and thanks, Dave. That's a great explanation. And to take it one step further, when we talk about the CVSS score, right, this 0 to 10 score, that score is based on multiple factors.
Yes.
One of them is how close to the box do you have to be in order to execute an exploit on that vulnerability, meaning anywhere from the internet, anywhere from the local network, anywhere physical access to the machine, right? So that the closer you get, the lower the risk because less people have that proximity to the box.
Right.
So yeah, so that's that. The good stuff. Let's do the raffle really quickly. People are now dropping in all sorts of RCE quasi acronyms here. People going on.
Share a few of those.
So let's do the thing. I didn't say what it was. You guys are so great for entering, not even knowing what it was for. This is for a TCM Academy course of your choosing. Compliments of Russell Brinson. So if you want to get that OSINT course or privilege escalation, it's yours for the taking. Let's do it. I got to find my drum roll sound effect, Dave. There it is. Can you hear the drum roll?
Not on my side.
Oh my God. If you guys can't hear the drum roll, Ron Clark, like I can hear it in my head, and I was dealing with AV issues. These guys are going to want me to start doing the sounds with my voice like I had to do a couple of weeks ago. Congratulations, Ron Clark, on your win. Connect with me on Discord or LinkedIn, and I will get you what you have won, and we'll do that, and that'll be a good time. It kills me, Dave. I do so much to have like all these little sound effects, bells and whistles. And like literally 2 weeks ago, I had a whole segment with different sound buzzers and it wasn't working. So I had caw-caw, like I had to make my own sound effects. And these guys, the Simply Cyber community, they took full advantage of that experience.
They ate it up, I'm sure.
Yes, they did. So, yeah. So I guess, Dave, looking forward, I mean, do you like if the trend continues the way it is, are we screwed? Like what? Like
I to be honest with you, I think we'll get to a point where there will be almost like a CI/CD pipeline for handling these kind of things, where the people will have to have the ability to visualize, prioritize, and handle with first and third party security controls. I argue that it will lead to software-based segmentation, which to some people view is very arduous to have to manage it. But we're getting to a point that you're going to have to, that you're going to have to be able to find these third and first party controls to manage things in a better fashion. And I'd argue, I really do believe we're at a point where if you are the VPC administrator, your virtual private cloud administrator for a company, that part of your activities will be owning up and managing everything that is in your purview. That a DevOps sec that will have to have some kind of checks for the applications they're pushing out to see if they're vulnerable, right? Mm-hmm. We do all sorts of playbooks today. I think that's the key, by the way. Automation's the key. That you look at CI/CD pipelines and you take Chef, Puppet, Ansible. These are all different playbook languages, and they go out and they push out whole VPC instances, thousands of servers with a few keystrokes. It'd be so easy to check. Well, is this version of TLS the latest and greatest? No problems. Okay, Apache log4j. Is this a version of Apache latest and greatest? Yes, it is. Boom, we're good to go. Right. The next day, there's another patch. Oh, wait a minute, not going to update it. Right. I think that has to become part of what we do is that the ownership has to get wider, and there has to be automation and the ability to visualize and prioritize.
Yeah, I think I agree. I think automation really is the future. Sometimes the questions are, where is machine learning? Where is AI fit into the information security space? Are the robots going to take my job?
No,
but
never will.
But yeah, but they won't. They're never going to be able to click the checkbox at the beginning when you're registering that
Right.
they're not a robot.
Right.
But
Aperture. They won't be able to find they won't be able to find the trees in the
yeah,
picture.
which one's a fire hydrant? Yeah.
It's just the
So
fire. Yes.
so I agree that automation is important because it's the only way that we're going to be able to scale
Correct.
with the inflow of all these vulnerabilities. Another thing that came to my mind that I think is important, worth discussing, is a lot of times you'll get a list of vulnerabilities that are essentially false positives, right?
Correct.
So that's another thing that we didn't even talk about. Where yeah, you have 10,000 vulnerabilities, but are they truly really vulnerable systems, or is it like it's saying that this version of a TLS is okay? It will make the handshake, and it's a slightly less secure encrypted connection. Well, if it's internal chatter and it's not sensitive systems, like who cares if it's eavesdropped on, right? Like, and chances are no one's going to get there and exploit that vulnerability to eavesdrop on a communication that has no value. So, like, is it really a vulnerability? So, understanding where true positives actually are, and this is, I want to like point out because I have been using your product, the Cymulate product.
Yeah.
One of the cool things, and guys, if you want, I've been thinking about maybe doing a video on like my experience using this tool. But one of the cool things is, like, if you run a vulnerability scanner and you say like your machine is vulnerable to this, go patch it or go do something to it. But at the end of the day, what we really care about is this a problem? Like, are my controls going to fix this or catch this, detect it, whatever? And that's one of the cool things that I've been using the tool with, is that you can pick like Log4j or like whatever the newest thing is. Like there was like the Redline info stealer the other day. Like
Yep.
you can run that on an endpoint, like a test endpoint that simulates what your environment would be. And it'll literally tell you that like your EDR solution stopped it. Like, let's say that first it launches, then it creates a new process, and then that process does process hollowing and injects itself into another, like a running service or something. Maybe your EDR doesn't catch the first two steps, but it stops the third step. Awesome. So then in reality, you can say like, I don't care if the vulnerability scanner says that we're vulnerable to it. I'm telling you, if it runs on our box, it's going to get stopped. So let's not focus on fixing this. Yes, it's important, but our protection, like our controls are fine. Let's focus where they're not fine, which it will also tell you. Right. So I guess not to pump your product, Dave, but like it's one of the cool things that I've seen is, instead of speaking theoretically about whether or not it could be exploited, you can actually do it and see if it would be exploited. And that's why we have defense in depth.
Absolutely. And that's the key. If you talk about gaining that prioritization, there's no better way than running attacks in an environment safely and seeing what security controls stop and what don't stop. Right. And so that's the key. That's and by the way, by doing it on a daily basis, you get that mindset. And often what people do is when they look at the new vulnerabilities that are out, they look at them and then they go see if they ran attacks with our solution.
Mm-hmm.
What was the success or not the success, right? And that's the key. Agreed.
Yeah. And and like now I'm like, oh, gosh, Dave, like I'm just starting to get all frothed up thinking about my own environment now, and feeling like a soapbox moment here. But like, another thing is like if you don't know what technology, like the shadow, you've been calling it phantom, like if you don't know the technology's there, like you don't even know you're vulnerable, right?
Yep.
And if you've programmed your scanners to scan certain network ranges and skip others because it's, medical devices and you can't scan them because they're sensitive and they're attached to patients and you can't knock it over or whatever, and someone puts something on that network, your vulnerability scanner is not even going to see it. And it's just, I don't know. It's frustrating and exhausting sometimes to like hold the tent up with your arms and, just, like it's dipping on your head and stuff like that. So, even if you wanted to patch all the things, sometimes you don't even know like where things are that need patching.
Correct. But again, an idea, and not to pump my product too hard, but the idea is that we have attack surface management. So part of going out there and attacking the environment also includes discovery.
Yeah.
right? And so whether you use my solution for that or another one, you should have an asset discovery, an application discovery mechanism in your environment that looks out there and finds the phantom IT, right?
Yeah.
Including the fact that, people have the eureka that they realize, oh my God, we have so many elevators in our enterprise that we have 10,000 elevator controls that are IP enabled in our data center VLAN, right? I've had that conversation, right?
Yeah.
Right, we have what, 609 devices out there, servers? No, you have 10,000 plus. Oh, that's also the controls. Oh my
Yeah.
God, the controls are in the data center, right? All that kind of stuff that happens all the time. But in some ways, today you better take the red pill versus the blue pill. You better know. You better raise that 10 up and take a look.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Even if you need a stiff drink afterwards, you need a stiff drink afterwards, you need to take the red pill and take a look.
Yeah, the first step is admitting or acknowledging that there's a problem, or instead of sticking your head in the sand. I definitely feel that. So, Dave, let me give you chat's been great today. You guys with the drum roll and then the captchas and stuff like that. Let me give you a moment here to have your final thoughts. And we'll listen to that, and then I'll bring you on, and then I'll share with everybody what they can expect for next week. So, Dave, the floor is yours.
Excellent. Well, as we were talking all along, the key here today is you need to take advantage of everything you can to take care of these vulnerabilities. You need to bring in all the different players and make them part of it. We talked about language, right? What a business person wants to hear, which is critical. We talked about ways to better use first and third party security controls to lock things down. And things like that, and understanding them. We talked about, what we do, extended security posture management, and being able to do offensive cybersecurity and do it from a perspective, while it's an exploit, see what vulnerabilities are behind it, so that when you come to a decision based on, is this going to affect my environment, you actually know, which is kind of critical. And so all that is really important.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dave, for
Thank
joining
you.
us and talking about threat and vulnerability management today with Simply Cyber.
Jerry, love to. This has been great.
Oh, appreciate it. All right, guys. So before you go, I want to share with you what we are doing next week, or what you can expect. Real quick, if you haven't dug in yet, and I know some of you have, right? I see you in their base and BSEC every morning. Michelle, Gregory, Wayne Shaw, Carrie, you guys are always in there, but if you don't know about it, every single morning at 8 a.m., we're doing this cybersecurity threat briefing. People seem to like it. I typically get spicy and flip out a little bit depending on the news of the day, but it provides context commentary. We have coffee. It's a good time. Check it out if you're interested in adding this to your routine. Like I said, it seems to be good. Next week for Simply Cyber Live, the Thursday stream, you guys might recognize Ricky Tan. He is the YouTube content creator for Cyberspatial. Dude's got like millions of views on some of his videos. He makes awesome videos. He tells great stories. Like that's probably like the biggest takeaway about his videos. Like his storytelling is on fire. So he's going to be coming on, and we're going to be talking about cyber cartography. Now, listen to me. If you're saying to yourself, what is cyber cartography? I literally asked that question myself. I have a PhD in cyber operations. I've worked in the field for like a million years. And he told me that he was a cyber cartographer in the military. And I'm like, oh, what? What is that? That's a role? And he's like, oh, yeah, it's a whole thing. I was like, all right, you've got to come on. We've got to talk about this and expand the scope of potential roles that people in the industry can have. Plus, I want to know more about cyber cartography. So hopefully you guys can join us next Thursday if you can't make it to the morning sessions. All right, guys. It's been really good. You've been a wonderful audience. I sincerely appreciate all of you and all that you do for the community. Thank you so much. And until next time, stay secure.